Zeb, is to look at this field and compare it to one of your other fields as far as evaluating soil health using the kind of criteria that. So kind of give us a little history about this field and before we do that evaluation.
Well, we're basically across the farm path from the first field that we stopped in. This field has not had the intensive cover crop history of most of the rest of our land, and due to some issues in the field, received full-scale tillage about 3 years ago. We worked it pretty hard to try to get rid of some issues in there. So that's kind of where we are. It just has not, it's not been treated to the full treatment as the field that we just left.
Okay, so it has similar soil type, but not necessarily similar management.
Yes, sir. Similar soil type, similar cropping history.
Okay, so what we want to do, all right, simple things farmers can do. I'm looking down here, I'm not seeing a lot of residue here.
No, sir.
So so that tells me,
well, it was a single species cover. We can see there's a little bit of residue left when we get down in to look at this stuff. And a lot of what you're seeing is just that that we killed it a little bit early, and it just was not big enough to be able to last throughout the year.
Okay, so it did break down, but it wasn't there. And you said that you no-tilled in it, so it's kind of a stale seabed type of thing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, which means you didn't do any tillage before that. Any other comments, Will, you got on the residue that you see that?
The only residue that's still present is just the cotton residue pretty much from last year, and that's broke down very significant. The other thing is there's a lot more of visible soil here. As this soil typically has, it has a high shrink swell, so we see some cracks or voids in the soil surface, which tells us that this soil doesn't have enough carbon to kind of stabilize its ability to hold moisture. When we see soils that move or separate, that tells us it's basically just a mineral portion. And as the soil becomes saturated with water, the water envelopes increase, which makes the soil particles swell. And when they dry down, they kind of congregate together and break apart. When we see a high amount of organic matter in a system, whether it be through crop residues and or cover crop, we don't see as much shrink swell. And we see that, and when we see that shrink swell, we're starting to lose a lot of water through evaporation and not infiltration to give us any benefits for our crop.
Okay. Let's watch Zeb. Can you get that shovel in the ground? Maybe see about a little compaction here.
We'll see what we can do. No, that's about it.
That's about it. Yeah, okay, so you're not so you're hitting a layer down there about 3 or 4 inches.
Well, we can certainly see it's flipped upside down, but we can see that shear plate. Basically, this is what is going to cause rooting factors in there. This would be our rhizosphere. As we see, we don't see the pore spaces that we saw in the other field. The other thing is, it's evident, we see that green slimy looking material. That tells us that soil is basically staying saturated. The water's ponding on top, it's not infiltrating in. We don't see any pore space. The other thing, we don't see that darker organic color. There's 2 major factors that color soil. Number one is a clay or iron content. Iron and carbon are the 2. Carbon would turn the soil darker, iron would turn it more redder. Here in the coastal plain, carbon is really the main factor that would change the soil color. We see a lot lighter. There's same soil type as what we looked at before. It's a sandy clay loam. There's some sand to it, but it's about 30% clay there. Very little structure. What we're seeing here is roots, the very end roots of these cotton plants were on 36-inch rows, so we're at the very end. But you can see it's not easily broken apart. It stays together. If it were, and it's probably about 30% moisture capacity. If it was a lot drier, it would be just as hard as a brick. We don't see a whole lot.
So infiltration, how much water compared to where we're at soaking in here?
Where we were at previously, we're looking at 1.5 inches probably per hour. This, we're probably looking at 1/2 inch per hour. Fortunately, this field doesn't have a slope greater than 2%. If it were on a sloping soil like we have in the central part of North Carolina, we would have a tremendous amount of erosion, because if in this time of the year, it's not very uncommon to have a 2 or 3 inch rain. 2 or 3 inch rain, again, we're only getting about a half inch. Everything else is running off.
Now Zeb, would your dad call that crusting?
Yes, sir.
So what would you have done as a kid to break that crust up?
No, we'd have put steel in it.
Put steel in it, okay.
We'd have tilled it.
You would have tilled it, okay.
And to what Will said as far as runoff and the infiltration rates, we had during the drought that we were in through most of July, we had actually a 3.5 inch rain that was just a torrential downpour right here. And to see the amount of water that was running out of these fields, I mean, we had half-inch sheet of water that was just running out the end of these. That was all moisture that we weren't able to capture.
Okay. So getting back to your visual observation, if water's leaving your field, there's an indicator you got a problem. Do you see any evidence of earthworms or pill bugs or springtails or anything like that?
We've got a few earthworm channels
Yeah, you do.
that are here. As far as anything on top of the ground, as far as springtails, beetles, anything that's moving around, I really do not see anything.
Of course, the limiting factor is they don't have any cover, then there's no residue, so the habitat is not conducive or very favorable for that kind of a thing, I would say on that. So.
David, you spoke earlier about crusting. We see that right there with that plate, that lighter color that we see right there. That's evidence of crusting. Had this crusting taken place in the springtime, a crust that thick, which is only about 1/8 to maybe 1/4 of an inch thick, that's enough right there to reduce germination. It won't stop germination, but it'll certainly reduce germination in a cotton crop if that crust were right over the seed trench.
But we don't see that, Zeb, in where you've got your cover crops, and that's one of the issues you don't have to deal with anymore.
Yes, sir. Crusting really is not an issue.
Okay, good. Well, why don't we take one of those aggregates back and we'll do that. What's it smell like? Does it got any smell to it?
No foul smell.
Does it have any smell?
No, no smell. No smell.
Okay, so again,
Odorless.
odorless. Well, which might be good for some things, but when it
Exactly.
comes to biology, you like to have a little smell to kind of
Exactly.
show things are good. So, any other comments observations? So,
Don't make me try to put this shovel
Shovel
in the
back.
ground again.
all right, let me ask this question, and then we'll move on. So, this is my field. What would be Will, I'm coming to you, and Zeb, where do I begin my system? What do I do to help change this?
We usually, with cotton, it's a pretty easy crop to get any type of cover established. A traditional practice is broadcasting cover crop seed, whether it be with ground equipment or through an airplane. We'll broadcast the seed out, then make the defoliation, and as the plant starts to lose its leaves, those leaves act as a mulch, which preserve moisture and shade the seeds during the hotter days of late summer, early fall, and it provides an environment where those seeds will come on up. And then they can come in and just harvest the crop. The green living cover underneath is not that big of an issue. Also, you can establish a cover crop with a grain drill, but truthfully, the problem with this soil, there's not enough living roots. The other thing is, though this field has had a single species cover, it was not allowed to get to its maximum height. If a farmer goes in and terminates a cover crop at its vegetative state, they really are not getting much of a return on their investment. It's not until you get any kind of cover crop, whether it be a grass like a small grain, a legume such as a clover or a vetch, or a broadleaf like a brassica, turnip, canola, something like that. It's not until you get that bloom stage that you really start to see a return on your investment, because the hotter times in July and August, we need it for the ground cover as far as keeping the soil cool and helping preserve its physical structures we saw today. And of course, weed control continues to be a big issue for everybody, not just cotton farmers. And having that physical barrier that reduces weed seed germination throughout the growing season is very important as well.
One quick question to you, Zeb.
Yes, sir.
Return on investment, what does that mean to you as a farmer? What kind of return on investment do you get from your system, your cover crop system?
Where we've been able to, or I guess where I've seen the return on the investment for us in the last 5-6 years, the quickest thing that a farmer is going to see if they start to adopt some of this, if they're using a single species cover and killing it when it's 12 inches tall, let it grow until it's waist high. And I think what you'll start to see as far as a return on investment, that's not costing you anything. Other than maybe a sleepless night wondering how you're going to plan into it, but it can be done. But what you'll see just from going from a 12-inch cover crop to maybe a waist or, maybe even chest high single species is you'll see a tremendous amount of weed reduction. The amount of weed pressure that you're going to fight throughout a year, throughout a crop year, is going to be a lot less if you let that cover crop grow and build some of that biomass. And that's really where we started to see money come back into our operation in the first year or two, was in the fact that we weren't spending as much on herbicides as we were before we started doing a more intensive cover crop. So I mean, I think that's what I've normally said if people ask is the first two things that you'll see as you start to increase your cover crops, let them grow and get more biomass out there in that field. The first two things you'll see are moisture retention and weed suppression. So I mean, those are going to be your first two big hits. But the weed suppression is one that's putting money directly back into your pocket because you're not spending it on herbicide.